Right, I am here at Irwinville Baptist Church. We are working on the Yamaha Mg166C. Probably the most important feature on this board is being able to turn the channel on, and that is done through pressing the button right here. That activates the channel to either function or not function. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take one of the channel strips and I'm going to go through all the buttons and the knobs and explain what they do, and then we'll go over to the master section and talk about how to put everything into the house and make it sound good. Alright, so the very top knob we have is a white gain knob. This would be considered a master gain for the particular channel that we're working on. So if I go to channel 1 and I turn channel 1 on and I go all the way up to the top knob, that is the master gain. Now I like to do what's called zeroing out the board, and the way I do that is I set it all the way far to the left, which would be off. I bring the bottom channel fader up to the 0 hash mark. You see it goes from infinity all the way up to plus 10 dB, and right in the middle there's a 0 mark. I'll set it at 0, and then I'll gradually come back up to my top gain knob, and I will turn it until the sound level is sufficient in the house. That's kind of the way that I set the gain structure. Now the knob right below it, which as you'll notice at this moment is turned all the way to the right, this is a compressor setting. And what the compressor does is it prevents the sound level from getting above a certain level. Now you'll notice on this particular board you have the first 6 channels have a compression setting on it. The reason you would want to have this is if you have 6 people singing on wireless microphones and one of them is continuously getting louder and softer, like you're singing, like you're holding the mic out here and the other person hits the mic right here, and they're just constantly varying this distance and one person's getting louder than the other, you can set the level hot when it's out here and then set a really hard compression setting here, and what that does is it keeps the volume more consistent as they move the mic in and out away from their mouth. So 0 is having it set at no compression, and running it all the way over to the right is maximum compression. If you want to initiate compression, I generally start it to the left and I begin to bring it up to the right until I'm able to see that I'm getting a matched level between the singers. If you want just kind of a generic point, you can set it straight up and down. It's really not a bad spot to start with, and that's just kind of a middle setting that allows the level to not go beyond a certain point, but it also allows you to raise the volume level of that particular channel up to the point that it's heard well. Now I use another feature, and I'm going to jump down here to the bottom because I think it's important since we talked about the compressor setting, PFL button. PFL means pre-fade listen, and what a pre-fade listen is it enables you to press this down. You will hear that channel out of the headphone outputs, which is the headphone outputs up here, and you will also be able to see it show up on the meters right here. So if I have the channel on, pre-fade listen pressed, over on the master section I will see the LED show up here, and I'll also be able to see and hear out of the headphone jack. So that enables you to set the compressor setting so that if you have 4 people singing or 6 people singing, by looking at the meters over here, even if you're hearing it in the house, you can use your headphones to hear in the ears, but you can see the meters to know that they're basically the same based on where the meters will read over in this area. You can see the number of bars that it goes up. Okay. The next section is your equalization section. And in this board we have a high, we have what's called a high with a mid sweep, and then we have a low. High are basically those instruments that would be considered your brightest instruments. In particular would be cymbals. It would be the upper range of the female vocalist, the top end of the piano, any instrument that reproduces a really high sound, a tambourine, anything that's very bright. This is going to dramatically affect how much more bright or how less bright it is. If you turn it to the right, you're increasing the brightness. If you turn it to the left, you're decreasing the brightness. Oftentimes feedback occurs on wireless microphones if this bright knob gets turned too far to the right. So oftentimes you may have to turn it down a little bit. Okay, the next 2 knobs are the mid frequencies. This is really where the magic happens on these consoles as far as being able to shape the sound to be something that's pleasing to the ear, not something that's irritating to the ear. Many times instruments will have an unpleasant volume level in the mid frequencies where the overall volume is not too loud, but it's too loud in a specific frequency. So on this board, I'm going to zoom in a little bit. You can see that it goes from, on the bottom end, 250 hertz on the bottom side to the top side of 2.5K, which is 2,500. So from 250 to 2,500. So the way this works is you can dial up or down a specific frequency by setting that frequency to whatever you want to set it to. So if I'm listening to a vocalist sing and they sound kind of wah, 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 got kind of a nasally sound, I'm going to know that that's in the mid-range, which could be anywhere from 1,000 up to 2,000. So I would just kind of set it in that area. Then I would take the knob above it, which actually affects the change. Like, it doesn't matter what you do to this knob. If that's set up straight up and down 0, there'll be no change in it. You can move it all you want. There's no change. It doesn't affect a change until you set this one and then move this one down or up. So if the sound is irritatingly nasal, you want to remove those frequencies. So I would set it somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000, and then I would turn the volume of that particular frequency to the left. Now, if you listen now and it sounds less nasally, but it sounds like you didn't quite get the frequency, you can leave the top knob turned to the left, and you can then sweep the frequency knob to see if there's a better frequency that makes it sound better. So those two knobs will always work together. If you add equalization to an instrument or a vocalist, is called additive equalization. If you were taking away, it's subtractive equalization, just terminology. Then the bass, well, let me say this about the mid frequencies. This is almost always where feedback problems happen. Things start squealing, that's generally where the issue is in those two knobs, being able to find the specific frequency and dial it down. The low end is obviously bass instruments, kick drums, low end of the piano, the organ, any of those sounds that cause the sound system to rumble or sound overly bassy, you're going to take them down by that. Okay, on this board we have 3 auxiliaries. An auxiliary is just an output that the board has that feeds something other than the main speakers. Auxiliary feeds can be used for monitors, which is what we're using on this board, but they can also be used to feed, choir rooms, those types of things externally that are not necessarily directly associated with the sound in the room. They can also drive effects engines. So if you had a reverb unit or something that you wanted to send, you can also use this to send a signal to a reverb unit. In this particular installation, we have auxiliary 1 is set up to be able to put music out to the choir. So when you affect auxiliary 1 on the specific channel, what it does is it sends whatever is on this channel. So if like I had a wireless mic on channel 1, when I turn auxiliary 1 up, whatever is on this channel, which in that illustration would be a wireless handheld, that is going to play that wireless handheld in that choir monitor. And that would be the same effect on any of the channels that are here based on whatever that particular channel is. If you turn it up, it's going to be fed to the monitors. We don't have anything in auxiliary 2 or auxiliary 3 at the moment. That could be used later on if you wanted to add additional monitors up there. Or if you needed to add, an overflow room for a funeral or something of that nature. Then you have this button called pre, and I would suggest on what we're dealing with right now that the pre button be pressed down on all the channels, and there would never be a reason to change that. What pre does is that means regardless of where the position of the fader is at the bottom, that the auxiliary will supersede the volume here. If you have it set in post, that would mean that when you pull this fader down, you turn the auxiliary off. That how loud this is also affects how loud that is. And so the problem would be is that if your vocalist is being fed back to the choir, every time you make an adjustment here, they can hear them less or too loud because you're affecting the change in the monitor. So by having it pre, then this can be a permanent setting that regardless of what you do down here to affect what you hear in the house, it doesn't affect what they hear in the monitors. So I would leave these at pre all the time. Now, the next thing is the pan. Pan affects 2 different things. Pan would be if you had stereo speakers, to the left would be coming out of the left speaker only, right would be the right speaker only. In the situation that we have right now, we don't want a stereo setting. We want both sides to hear exactly the same thing because people are sitting on each side of the room and the person on the left of the room doesn't need to hear something missing on the right side of the room. They need to hear everything. So we're running the board mono, so we run this up and down. But we're going to see in the very next section where we have these press buttons here, 1, 2, 3, 4, and stereo. This would be an example. It's an assignment button that says if I press 1 and 2 and I turn these other two off, what I have effectively done is I have routed the signal of this channel through this master fader over here. And then with this button pressed in, this fader is then fed to the master fader, which goes out to the speakers. So it's kind of, if you think of it in terms of a garden hose, this would be the spigot at the house, this would be the spray nozzle somewhere along the way, and then this would be the grass. So the grass is not going to get watered if you don't have this up at the channel as well as having this one up. So if I turned channel 1 on, and I pulled this fader down, even if the master fader is up, the signal is not going to get to the master fader because it has to go through this. So this is one way. But now you would say, well, what's the advantage of that? The advantage would be is I could put all 4 solo mics, I could put all 6 of your wireless mics, 1 through 6, on this one fader. And if I had the balance, let's just say the balance was something kind of crazy like this, where each singer is a little bit different in their setting, but yet I'm playing the CD on, say, whatever track 13, 14 is, and I want to bring up the volume of all the singers rather than having to go over and turn each one up and remember proportionately how much more this one is loud than that one. I can go over to this section and I can proportionally turn them all up or turn them all down. Nice little trick for running sound. So that's a good feature to know. And the reason that you would have the knob here would be if you only wanted, say, these first 3 to be channel 1 only, see it's group 1 and 2, and you only wanted it to be 1, I could actually turn this knob all the way to the left, and these 3 with 1 and 2 down and these others unpressed would only be fed to this side of this, which would be the equivalent of only coming out of the left channel of the master. If you leave it in the middle, it's both 1 and 2, which is like feeding left and right from here to left and right here to left and right here. But if you turn it to the left, you're only feeding left here, and left here. There again, we're running the board mono. Always leave it in the middle position. There's not a reason on this console to run it left and right. So I go back to saying if you wanted to group your microphones where you had control, since your wireless mics, see, we started our wireless mics on 5 through 12, so what we could do in that situation is let me turn these back off, set all these back to stereo, go to channel 5 and turn it on 1 and 2, all the way up through here. So now, the way that I have it set, channel group 1 and 2 here now affects